Hey guys. We're gonna start Act 2 for today. I'm gonna be introducing the luncheon keynote panel in a moment, but a little bit of housekeeping and actually advertisement for one of our sponsors. So a kind woman in the back, can you stand up? Rinku, can you stand up? So she grabbed a bag from vendor, which is fantastic. She put her program guide and cell phone in the bag, left it at one of those back tables somewhere, and it's not there anymore. So I said I would call her, but the phone is on silent. And so if anyone finds this vendor bag, just bring it up to the registration desk and we'll not only give you like a big hug, maybe a free ticket for next year. So there you go. Anyways, Nina and the rest of the team, let's come on up. We're excited for our luncheon keynote. Thank you.
So pleasant. Yeah, it's pretty bright. It looks as if we're missing someone. Okay, guess I was all good?
That's all good.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for joining. I hope you had a good lunch break. I'm Nina Trentmann, Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal CFO journal covering corporate finance. And I'm glad to be here again after what felt like a long break during the pandemic, and it's great to see so many people in person here today. Yeah, we're talking about a pretty broad and still important topic today here for the luncheon panel. Leadership is of course something where I often hear from CFOs and also from recruiters saying, oh well, CFOs are sort of the second in command, and strategy, vision, leadership comes from the company's top, from the CEO and other executives. And I've certainly wondered in recent years with the pandemic and all the other things that happened, that CFOs are of course much more than just responsible for the numbers, and that actually when it comes to leadership, there's a lot that you all can add to the discussion and to the table. So I'm curious to discuss this with my panelists today, hear a little more about how they're defining leadership in this current environment where you and we're all facing still the aftermath of the pandemic, geopolitical tensions ranging from Ukraine to potential conflicts in Asia, facing high inflation and other issues such as climate change, for which many of us probably still haven't found the answers. So happy to turn it to my three panelists today. We'll be discussing what good leadership is and how people measure it. I'm being joined by three high-profile CFOs today. Anat, the CFO of Eli Lilly. Then we have Munish from 3M. And Ken from Prudential Financial. Thank you very much for joining me today. And we'll kick this off with an intro question for all three of you, and then we'll take it up or pick it up from here. Just in a minute, if possible, what are the leadership characteristics that matter to most in today's environment? Ken, if you get us started.
As you mentioned, I mean, managing uncertainty obviously is high on the list right now. As you mentioned, with the pandemic, with inflation, with wars, I mean, dealing with uncertainty is very important and on top of mind for everybody. I'd say also, though, because of that, communication is vitally important. And how you make sure that with all your constituents, your communication is frequent, clear, and hitting the mark. And then lastly, sticking to your purpose. That's sort of the North Star that will help guide you as you try to balance all the things that are hitting you in the short term, but staying focused on the long term.
Sure. I'm going to add on what Ken said. I would say exactly the same. I think as a leader, there's so many data points coming at you right now from an external perspective. The ability to take all of that, absorb it, and then focus your organization is very, very important. Second, I would say is remain agile, because you have to embrace the red. You have to win daily. So daily management is a big piece of it. Third, Ken said about purpose. I would say the same, is at the same time, you got to make sure you're focused on the long term. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this uncertainty shall pass. And you got to make sure that you have a business that exists at the end of it, which means continuing to invest in areas that you believe is long-term growth potential for your company, your industry. And then I would say double down on diversity and inclusion, but at the same time, try to keep some of the empathy that people have all built over the pandemic, I think is all great characteristics of good leader.
So it's a little challenging to add when you've had really good comments. And I always say that these types of question, you can probably read many business books on this topic, and they'll all have a list of characteristics that will be accurate and important. Sometimes when I look at them and I say, oh, I don't have this one. So does it mean I'm not a good leader? No, because you are who you are, and you have to be who you are and lead in a way that makes sense the most to you. I think if you look common across all good leaders, whether you like them or you don't, they're all incredibly sharp in intelligence. They understand their business deeply. They are excellent communicators, and they know how to set the right direction for the firm. So I always think about it, the CEO, it's kind of the captain at the helm. They know exactly how to direct the ship. They can see beyond the next wave. They can see around corners. And they are very good at setting the direction, not just for their lead teams, but for the entire organization of what you need to do to get through tomorrow, as well as get to the future that they're going to kind of outline for the organization.
Yeah, that was a good way of putting it. Well, thanks for giving us that little intro statement, each of you. Just wondering if we're thinking about what has happened in the past 18 to 24 months, a lot has changed in the world. Many things that have happened we didn't really see coming. Just wondering if there's anything you would point out that has changed in how you're leading your companies, in terms of how you're leading your finance organizations. Are there little changes or big changes that you executed in response to the changing environment? You're both nodding. I don't know who wants to go first. Go ahead.
Sure.
Monish?
So I would say, a couple of things that have happened 18, 24 months. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think a few things have not changed in the finance function, which is you got to make sure you're a good steward of capital. You got to make sure from a compliance controllership perspective, your job to keep the company safe doesn't change. I would say the third piece is agility. And I think there's more intentional focus in our finance teams at 3M, is the environment's changing a lot every day. And how do you make sure, I'm using Annette's word, look around the corner and start predicting what the world could look like? You can't predict political uncertainties like the war in Ukraine versus Russia, but you can predict that higher inflation is going to have an impact on demand. And how do you predict that, and how do you start taking actions early? So at 3M, we use embrace the red, which is admit you have a problem coming up, and then be agile. So that's one that's changed. I would say the other thing that's changed a lot is how do you manage to work in a hybrid workspace? There were, at a point in time, people thought you would never be able to close the books if you were not all sitting in a room. And for 2 years, people have managed to continue to do that well. You're now having employees who want to be in a hybrid world. Some people prefer coming in, some people don't. And how do you make sure all of them feel a part of one organization is the trick. So again, at 3M, we've created this thing called Work Your Way, which is we're giving people utmost flexibility to come in. But as leaders, we're making a point that in the moments that matter, we start bringing people together, whether it's a big meeting, whether it is a funding decision, whether it is you have strategic plan discussions. But that's being very intentional. So that I would say is a change. It's you're intentionally giving people the flexibility, but you have to remind yourself all the time, you have to at some point bring people together to solve a problem. So those are some of the changes.
Maybe I'll just add maybe something more internally. What we've found was a big shift was the way we communicated. in terms of not just the frequency of communication changed, the forum of which we communicated, and the style. So in terms of frequency, we've been in business for 140 years. We were more traditional, more formal. So we would more or less go around a quarterly rhythm in terms of our communication patterns. In the pandemic, that went from quarterly to daily, right? We were getting messages out daily from teams, company-wide, and then also weekly patterns and monthly patterns. So the frequency really increased a lot. And then in terms of forums, we went from emails to, what we used to be emails, kind of in-person discussions, to videos, short videos, to webcasts, to podcasts, trying to use all methods of communication that to reach out to people. And then lastly, our style changed quite a bit too. People were broadcasting from their living room, right? So we went from very formalized, scripted type of communication to much more conversational, informal, discussion-oriented. So, and as a result, we're able to reach people much more often, in many different ways, and having a much better connection with people.
You mentioned changes in style. I was wondering, during the pandemic, we saw many companies discovering a form of emphatic leadership, trying to be more understanding of their people, given that everybody was going through tough times. Do you see that emphatic leadership survive, even though we're sort of back to normal and potentially entering a recession?
I think there's always room for empathy in business. You don't have to be in a situation like a global pandemic to demonstrate empathy for others. That's just human behavior that we should always demonstrate in our business life and personal life. So I don't think that's changing. I think what's changed a little bit during the pandemic is we've realized that we're all in very, very different situations, right? So even if we thought some people really want to work from home. So we had the question of, do we bring people back to the office? At what stage? What are we asking them to do? Well, we've had employees who their social life was in the office because they were living on their own. They didn't have any family members close by, and they really, really wanted to go back to the office. And some that had now childcare responsibility and were in different situations. So just understanding where teams are is critically important. If I can add just to the previous one, I would use one word that I think is absolutely crucial, and that's resiliency. I think in today's environment, and it's always the case, but it's just proven, if you have an organization that's not resilient, those organizations, we see that start falling apart when there is a crisis, right? They're just not built to withstand those issues. And to the earlier points, you can't precisely predict, we're going to have 8% inflation, or there's going to be a war somewhere else, or China's going to lock down, we can't ship supply. You can't predict exactly what's going to happen. But what we've done is several years ago, we started building for uncertainties, and we don't know what they are. So we list a whole list, and we run a Monte Carlo with 500,000 scenarios, assuming that the future we're outlining for ourselves will actually not happen. So we assume failure. That's not how we operate, but for scenario planning, we assume failure, and then we ask ourselves, if we failed, why did we fail? And then what are the mitigating actions we want to take ahead of it? So 2.5 years ago, we thought, well, maybe there'll be hyperinflation followed by recession. And we didn't believe that's actually going to happen. But we said, let's build some mitigation efforts just in case it does happen, and it did. But you create this envelope, and we have a financial number out there that says, if a set of issues will occur, here's probably the impact to the business. So how do you drive growth with having that in the back of your mind? And we talked earlier about setting kind of a clear direction for the organization. You can't have people in your organization panic about, oh my gosh, the sky's falling and things are not going to go well. They have to have a sense of confidence and understand of where we're heading. But then you want to have a team that's working on, let's reinforce, right, the organization to make sure it is a strong, resilient organization while demonstrating empathy for your team.
You were mentioning an important point, the question as to failure and how important is that for learning, especially if we're thinking about leadership and being role models for employees. Are there situations that Monish or you can think of where you from the outside failed, but you actually learned something as a leader?
Yeah, I think I would tell you I've failed enough number of times and got knocked on my head quite a few number of times. But I would say as I reflect on failure many a time, it has been lack of listening. And I've tried to work really hard on that to make sure that you actually are getting the collective voice. Doesn't mean you have to run your company by just majority votes, but it's important that every voice is heard. So a few years, this was 10-ish years ago, I got a knock on my head because I realized I had not got all the voices in the room telling me what an event could happen. And so for me, that has been, I would say, was my own pivotal point on making sure that I'm actually trying to get the voices of the quieter ones in the room, because they may have an opinion, but they're hesitant to say it. So I'll find a safe space where I can have that conversation, where some people, okay, just want to do it one-on-one, and I try to make sure I capture their thoughts. And for me, that has been where I take the time to actually get the voices in. I'm actually listening to what they're telling me, and then I'll make the call as I need to make the call. But you normally don't need to make it yourself, because as people start talking, you normally come to the right answer. So for me, it's about very active listening, and I try to do that as much as I can.
And maybe I'll just add to that, listening and getting input. And I think a lot of CFOs would sympathize that, you're really challenged with two big tasks. One is to drive growth, and that requires that you think big and be ambitious. But the other is to be the skeptic, to make sure we're realistic about what we're trying to achieve and when, to make sure you have good execution. And that's a dynamic that you kind of you flip back and forth on quite a bit. And as I reflected about a lot of my failures, it was trying to get that balance right. And I'm generally an optimist by nature. And so some of the failures I've had is I didn't listen enough to my own instinct of where something could go wrong. And one of the things that we've done to sort of institutionalize that a little bit is to designate on certain projects like acquisitions a designated skeptic. So their role is to take that devil's advocate view and make sure it's heard. And so so you try to make it a process as opposed to just letting human nature take care of it.
That's actually super interesting, given that I was wondering if there is an institutional way of basically sort of incorporating, as you said, skeptics or criticism or even potential failure into a...
It doesn't make the person all that popular, by the way, but it's an important role.
Well, I guess it would be an alternating duty so that everybody gets to be the skeptic now and then. Right. You mentioned communication as an important element of being a leader and how that has changed at your company during the pandemic. I'm wondering how far your communication with employees, but also stakeholders might have changed or is changing, given that companies are facing like these huge generational shifts as well, with Gen Zs now arriving in the workforce, millennials already being there, baby boomers being on the way out, if one can say that, or at least sort of getting closer to retirement, which of course also changes the makeup of companies quite substantially.
So I'll be the first to admit, so we have this online chat forum where employees talk to each other, they brainstorm ideas, they share stuff. I still have not figured out how to precisely post. Someone from the communications team have to walk me through it. And when we initially had this, I thought seriously, like, who's gonna use this, right? But then you see a slew of people, like people really, they are thirsty for that communication where it's open for everyone. There is no levels. You can all have the open conversation. And I started posting. So I think that's a change. When I joined the company, there wasn't a tool. And I'm sure it wasn't a tool 10 years ago. But now it's just part of how people talk to each other. So we have to be engaged in that type of communication. Externally, it's interesting because I took this job at the midst of the pandemic. So we were not in person. First day in the job, we went out with a press release, and I walk into the office, and there are 3 people there, myself, the CEO, and the head of HR, and security. But the building's empty, right? Because we've sent people home. We told them, it's better for you to sit in home and work from home. That's a whole different way of assuming a CFO role for a large cap company. And the following day, I was online with investors, right, for 3 days. And that's different for them as well. So how do we adjust to that? I started by doing what we termed internally as a listening tour. So I went through all of our top probably 30 to 40 investors, 30 minutes on the phone with each one of them, not answering questions, but actually asking them questions. So I asked them, what's on your mind? What concerns you about the company? What excites you? Are you getting the right communications from us? Are we communicating with you in the way that's meaningful to you and at the frequency you want? Is there anything different you think we should be doing? So for the first time, I was listening to them as opposed to answering all the questions. And then I repeated that a year into the job. Because I said, okay, the kind of a check-in 15 minutes, now 30 now. And I really want to understand, what have you seen so far? What do we need to change? So it's, because it's often, for all of you in the room who are CFOs or executives at public companies, you do this on a regular basis, but typically you're sitting and answering, right, all the questions, or you're in a panel, you're in a fireside chat, and you're representing the firm. And investors are used to that as well. It's not often that you on the other side and say, actually, I want to listen to you. I want to understand what's on your mind. You're still running the business. They're not running the business. But they're important, and they see other CFOs and other executives and other firms. So they have a good understanding, and they have deep understanding of the business. So that's just something we've introduced as well.
Monish, I saw you smiling at that.
No, it's something similar to Annette. So I did join during the pandemic too. I didn't even have the CEO, CHRO that day. It was just my admin who let me into the office and then quickly ran away. So I spent the whole day alone, and I'm wondering, what am I doing on this big building? There's not a soul. So even I decided that I'm going to work from home after that. But I did something very similar to her, which is I went and asked all the buy-siders and the sell-siders what they thought about 3M. I got a chance to also meet a few regulators along the way to figure out what they thought about 3M. What I have reflected on over the last few years and being in this role new, most of your stakeholders want you to win. They actually believe you're a good company and they want you to succeed. So having the humility to ask them what really matters to each stakeholder is so important, because what is important to an investor may not be the same to a regulator, may not be the same to your employee base. They're all so different what they want. But ultimately, they all want you to win. And for me, that has been, I would say, the other piece here is making sure that you're listening as much as you can. I also did a similar one-year touch-in, and I thought it was pretty enlightening to see outside in what feedback they give you versus what you think you may have achieved. And I think that's a great calibration tool. So.
Are you doing that in finance as well, sort of specifically for finance employees?
Yeah, so we are running a lot of lean projects. I'm a big believer of lean as a method of driving efficiency. So we started with pain points. We had 1,500 pain points along the way. We had a survey. From there, we said we're going to pick 15 that would really matter to the company. One was more efficient close. The other one was automation with cash apps. I can go through the details, but you get the point. It was pain points for employees. And we also asked them how often do they want to get communicated to. So at 3M, we use Yammer, which is a way to communicate. And we made sure that people actually were starting to share their wins and stories along the way, and we have kept checking in. So I do a monthly simplification review to make sure that we are actually meeting the goals that we've said, which goes down, Nina, to what problem are you trying to solve? In our case, it was these pain points which were couched under simplification. If I simplify, you get the time to do what you may want to do versus just do a lot of data crunching. So that's the way we always go back, is what problem we're trying to solve, make sure we define that, make sure we have the resources, and then we just keep monitoring it till it gets there. Then as a senior leadership team in finance, their job is to make sure they're breaking the barriers for all the employees, just so that we get to the end goal. So it's been good to watch the teams make progress over the last 2 years, and much more intentional communication.
One thing that we've seen in the past 1-2 years is a lot of social issues coming to the surface as well. Not just the murder of George Floyd, but also other questions where some companies have chosen to take a pretty clearly defined position and also voicing that, even though it wasn't necessarily to do especially with their business. I'm wondering how you think as executives, as finance leaders, about companies positioning themselves politically. Is that also a form of leadership that you should strive to, or also why not?
Maybe I'll start. Yeah, it's a really important topic, but a really challenging one, because almost if you take a position, there'll be some that are with you and some that are against you. If you don't take a position, the same dynamic happens. And so you do have to approach it with a lot of care. The George Floyd incident, for us, that was at the heart of, equality, and Prudential's for a long time strived for financial equality. And so we had made racial commitments before, but following that, we made 9 racial commitments as a result of that. When we do that, we give it a lot of thought, and we make sure all of our stakeholders are represented when we make those decisions.
Just from our end, we are all blessed to be in the roles that we are. And if we can't make a difference to the world with our positions, then it's a very different conversation to have. I would say in our case at 3M, a couple of things. One is we doubled down on diversity and inclusion. The unfortunate incident with George Floyd happened in our headquarters town of St. Paul, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities. So that actually hit the company even harder. Second one, I would say, is environment. As a company, we've made sure that we are not only going to improve water usage by nearly 90% by 2030. We have carbon goals to get 80% carbon reduction by 2040 and then carbon neutrality by 2050. And we're going to invest $1 billion to get there. And as a CFO, wanting to make sure that we, one, find the capital to do that because it's the right thing to do. But secondly, I know sometimes ESG is such a hotly debated topic, is if there's an economic return to it or not. My view, there are 2 things. One is you have to do it because it's right for the world. But secondly, also there is a business proposition to this. So for example, in our auto electrification space, sustainability, where you're going to have cars that are more electrified, our business can do a lot. So there's a fine balance between the two, but getting a return on ESG is equally important and not just a buzzword. But I go back to, as large corporations, it is our job to make sure that we are doing what's right for the environment, what's right on the social side. But I agree with Ken, and I would use Annette's words on empathy too. You have to be thoughtful as you put out these goals. Not everybody is going to like everything you say. There's always going to be a side that disagrees with you. But as a company, if you believe in a certain direction or philosophy, I would say just go for it.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, as large corporations, we have a social responsibility. And when we think about stakeholders, it includes the communities we operate in, our employees, our customers, and they all represent part of this, the fabric of this society. So, we've taken some very hard, strong stands on certain issues, and I'm proud of the company for doing that. I think that's incredibly important.
Also, if it gets the company into hot water?
Sometimes it does, but that's okay. I mean, I think there are things that are just right. I mean, I think we all know them in our heart. They're just the right thing to do. Equality is not something you do, or inclusion, to drive profit or because you need a check mark in a dashboard. It's because it's the right thing to do, and as business leaders, we need to do those things.
Ken, you mentioned those racial commitments that the company made. How often are you following up on them, and how are you making sure that you're executing on them in the finance function?
Yeah, we were quite public with it. We monitor it regularly. We assigned accountability throughout the organization for them. And we have a sustainability report that we publish annually. It has all of our ESG commitments in there, including net zero and our progress towards that, but also our progress towards our 9 commitments.
Monish, you mentioned climate change, ESG, which would have been my next question as to sort of how do you consider climate change also as a test for your leadership? Of course, this happens at a time when we see a surge in ESG investments. We're also seeing strong pushback from some largely Republican-governed states here in the US against ESG and even against the notion that there is climate change. How do you think companies should position themselves in this? And not just you, but all of you, if you want to.
Yeah, so from our end, sustainability or environmental stewardship has been a hallmark of 3M. And I go back to what Annette said, you either believe in it or you don't. And in this case, you know it's the right thing to do. And so you just got to do it. So at 3M, we said, we want to continue having our environmental stewardship. We are going to invest the right amount of money to make sure that we are doing what it is. Whether it is improving water, whether it's reducing carbon usage, all of those matter. We also have made sure that it's not just being done in developed nations, because that's where some of the current rules are, but making sure as we are investing in emerging markets, that most of all our factories actually are meeting the higher standards that at some point are going to come into those countries too. So making sure you're thinking ahead. At the same time, finding the capacity to invest that kind of money always means you're prioritizing somewhere else. But for us, environmental stewardship as a company was extremely important. There is a business model to be had here too, which I said in our electrification business, that we are making sure that that's a trend we are seeing. So it's not just us investing in it, but we know our customers are going to invest in it too. So making sure that we are working with them to figure out solutions that help them achieve their goals too, because everybody has these goals out there. But as an industrial ecosystem, if you don't really have a full ecosystem, I don't think we'll get there as a group. Is how do you partner with them, with our R&D folks, to help our customers also start achieving their goals? Because we are an input into their output and making sure that we are connected to that too. So it's a big deal for us, and we are putting our money where our mouth is. So.
Maybe, for us, climate change will be a risk, and we're in the business of managing long-term risks, right? That's what we do, understanding them and then adjusting to them. And climate change will manifest itself in many dimensions, geographies, sectors, industries, economies. And so we try to look at that, and we factor that into how we invest for our general account and our insurance businesses, and how we're investing for other third parties as well. It's going to have a dynamic, not just in isolated instances. It's going to have a wide range of effects, and we try to look at the gamut of those.
Do you think that, just wondering, sort of within companies, what role do you as CFOs have in figuring out this company's stance on a certain topic, like, for example, climate change or social issues versus your CEO versus board? Like, how do these conversations usually work, and how vocal are you also as CFOs in these?
I would say CFOs in general are part of the executive team for the firm, and I'm sure it's the same for my colleagues here. And we're in all these conversations and part of the decision making, and we advocate just like the CEO would, or the head of HR, or those that have head of ESG, et cetera. So we're part of that organization making those decisions. For us at least, it's a full executive committee that had, just like you mentioned, set of goals and metrics. We all have that, and then it translates to individual metrics for all of us. So we all look at these things combined. Now, obviously, you have certain people that have certain responsibilities. You need to have expertise, et cetera. But CFOs, I'm sure you all know this, are highly engaged in all the critical discussions for any organization.
I agree with Annette. I really don't have much to add. I'm saying we all have an equal seat at the table. But you do need the expertise and the help. But I have an equal seat at the table, and I think if you have a seat at the table, you should use it. Otherwise, why have a seat at the table? And I think I'm quite vocal about my opinions on some of these matters. And I'm blessed that I have an executive committee that listens to you and also takes your input. At the end, the board will decide with the CEO. But I think have a great chance to voice my opinion, which I do.
Anat, you said one thing about being prepared as a leader, talked about scenarios and sort of planning with different scenarios. Is there now a wider range of scenarios that you're planning with, given that the pandemic has brought home to all of us that the things that we thought wouldn't happen actually did happen?
No, we've always had a very broad range of scenarios, and they include things that we think are less likely to occur, but we model them. Now, you don't spend too much time on the things you don't think will occur, and we have kind of agreed to prioritize these, these are the things that we think are more likely, less likely, high impact, low impact. I'm sure you all do this. But at the end of the day, it's thinking about, something will happen. Something always happens. Think about the last 5, 10 years. Something always happens. Can you predict? Were you able to predict exactly each one of those changes? No. I mean, if anyone here did that, please raise your hand. I'd like to know who you are. But it's hard, right? It's really hard to precisely predict what will happen. The question is, are you prepared for different events? Because the one thing we are all certain about is change, and the world around us will evolve in a way that we didn't necessarily predict it. So it's being prepared for a broad range of outcome and being resilient. But again, I think the challenging piece is when you do scenario planning, and they're typically like the worst case scenarios, an organization can get paralyzed and almost focused on, it's a disaster and the sky's falling and nothing's going to move, so we can't invest, and et cetera. And that's the wrong thing. That's even worse than not planning. It's okay, I understand those scenarios. Are there any operational hedges that I should probably put in place regardless of what's going to happen, because it's not very costly, probably the right thing to do? And then how do I actually orient? What we've done the last several years is ask yourself, how do we orient the firm towards growth? And that's the focus. That's where I need 95% of our employee base to focus on, is orient towards that growth and towards a set of goals. And a few people looking at the what ifs and making sure they're prepared. And in a finance organization, you said you're an optimist, but a lot of us kind of plan for the down scenarios, right? When we look at the upside, by the way, you have to be prepared for the upside. We've just had one recent example in our company, so being prepared for an upside is also important. But building that resiliency and agility that was mentioned earlier, absolutely critical when you look at the range of scenarios.
Maybe the one thing I'd add is and as you would expect, we do a lot of scenario planning, look at discrete scenarios, but we also make sure we can operationalize it. You would hope that a life insurance company would plan for a pandemic, and we did. But one of the things that we had in our plans, we actually had hundreds and thousands of K95 masks in storage, and when they were in short supply, and we had them in case our employees needed them. We didn't need them. We went all virtual, so we were able to donate those to the medical facilities that needed it. But when we do our scenario planning and our stress testing, we take it a step further and we actually do simulations, because we won't know exactly how it plays out. But you need to know, what's your playbook? What are you going to turn to? What decisions are you going to look to first? What key indicators are you going to monitor to see if that may be arising? But then also, how do you communicate? Who makes what decision? Who communicates to the board? Who communicates to regulators, and when? So we go through simulations to actually test our ability to operationalize our plans.
I'll just add one, that's a learning for us as a deep industrial company. Understanding our supply chain, the length of our supply chain, I would say is a learning through the pandemic. And the reason is you have suppliers who may have a supplier, who may have a supplier, who may have a supplier. That's tier 7 or tier 8. In the normal world, you never thought about a tier 7 or tier 8 supplier. And you just assumed the material would land up when they land up. But through what happened with the geopolitical crisis in Europe, through the pandemic, through the COVID outbreak in China that's again going on, knowing that tier 7 or tier 8 is becoming more critical. So we have spent a lot more time thinking through those scenarios seeing whether our single sole source suppliers versus dual sourcing, just to make sure we can keep our factories running, I think has been a big learning through the pandemic for us.
I wanted to follow up on one thing that you mentioned earlier about leadership also being about sort of giving safe spaces for people to provide feedback. Just wondering, for you all as company leaders high up in the hierarchies of your companies, do you have an internal sounding board? Who is giving you honest feedback on what you guys are doing? And I don't mean sort of performance feedback, but more sort of, which probably the board would give you, but more from within your employee base.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because no one wants to challenge you necessarily when you're at the top of the organization. So how do you cultivate it so people do challenge you? It's really hard. I'd be interested in what what you're doing. One of the things, I've done two things personally. One is over the years, I've asked different people to actually who sit in meetings with me to give me feedback after that. Like, you insulted someone or you said something that, direct feedback immediately after, not sugar-coated, not explanation, just direct. It was incredibly helpful. And you need someone senior enough, not your CEO, but someone who's kind of at your level. The second thing that I do, at least with my team in finance, when we make a decision, I then stop and say, tell me why this is wrong. And if, there are crickets in the room, that's an issue. You want people to be able to speak up. And it's fine if, they say something that's completely different than what you thought. But you have to encourage that. It's kind of the skeptic you mentioned earlier. You need to say it's okay to say it, not just it's okay to say it. I expect you to think critically about a decision and say, where can this decision fall apart?
We do our employee surveys, like I'm sure everybody does. That's an important source, and we always target things that to improve upon there. I personally just try to take every opportunity to just ask people, hey, what do you think? From our CEO to actually I have lunch with our summer interns, and I'd say, how's it going? What do you think of this? So there's the formal ways, but there's also just the informal ways are really important.
So I pretty much try to do what both of them have said. There's a Japanese word called gemba in lean management, which is going and meeting your operating line. So I try to do that as often, which is not just go one layer down, but go as low as you can to get feedback from the operating line on the decision you made. What do they really think about it? They have less pressure in telling you why something's not working than maybe the next in line. I also have my own peer group that I use, like Annette said, which is after a tough meeting, like give me feedback, just so that, and then I try to explain give them context too on why I made a certain decision, and just make sure people are comfortable. At the end, we'll make what's right for the company. But if it's a tough meeting, I also follow up a little later just to make sure the employee understood where we were coming from versus just saying this is the directive and go for it. So, and try to be as transparent. I do it on Yammer. I'll go out there and ask people to poll. I sometimes get people to do anonymous posts just to get the conversation going amongst people. So try different ways, but that's the only way you can keep yourself honest, is getting honest feedback.
You all have been in management for several years or even decades. Just wondering if you can mention someone or like a person or like a book or something that helped you develop your own personal leadership style and that helped you to get to where you are today?
I'm happy to start. I'll mention one, and I know people ask about mentoring, which is also important. Sponsorship, really critical, probably even more so than mentorship along your career. And a sponsor is someone that knows you well, right? No one can sponsor you if they don't truly believe in what you do and your capabilities, but then helps pull you through the organization, right? They'll be in when you're earlier in your career in meetings where you're not in and decisions are being made, and they'll advocate for you, right? They're an advocate. And I've had a few of these along my career, so I'm very fortunate to have had those. But I can think at least of one person that was probably midway through my career with Lilly, he was my supervisor and a senior member of the organization, but had an open door. I would go and say, hey, can we brainstorm something because I'm working on a problem? And we would whiteboard it. No pre-reads, no presentation. We'd go to the whiteboard and we'd brainstorm some things. And he'd give me ideas and feedback, and he was an excellent sounding board, right? It's rare you find someone, people like that around you who are very open and really have a vested interest in your success. You've said it earlier, most people want to see you succeed. But I can certainly remember a few people throughout my career who did it for me. I think when we all get to this position, it's our responsibility to do it for others. As senior executives, I think we're talent scouts, where we have to identify that top talent, develop and grow them through the organization, and make sure they succeed in more senior roles, so that when I walk out and when I retire at some point, there's great bench behind me, or senior leaders in the organization who have done really well throughout the years. But it's something that I think we have to proactively think about all the time, is who are those people that we're sponsoring across the organization? It can't be a list of 10, because then you're really not dedicating your time to it. But who are those 1 or 2 people that you're helping out? Because others, I'm sure, have helped. All of us probably have been helped by someone throughout our career.
Just from my end, listen, I've been blessed in my career to have hung around with some very, very key important leaders. And for me, every meeting actually has been a learning opportunity, including the panel where I'm on right now. So I've been blessed with people who have given me feedback on daily management, operating rigor, how do you build a team, how do you communicate, how do you create more empathy, et cetera. So I would just say I'm a collection of all the ideas that I have had people along the way tell me. And I agree with Annette. Our jobs is to make sure that we are creating the next generation of leaders and leaving a bench. And I use the word like no employee should be allowed to hold a company hostage. In other words, that you're the only person in the company that adds value and no one else does, because then you haven't really built a deep team. So I'm just been lucky to have met so many people who have been kind enough to give me advice, and that's how I built my career.
Yeah, for me, and probably like many, sort of my upbringing influenced my style a lot. And I actually grew up where Manish is headquartered right now in Minnesota, and it's cold there, as Manish is going to find out this winter. And so I grew up playing ice hockey. So a big influence of me was being a part of a team. And hockey's an incredibly team-oriented sport. It takes the whole bench plays and has to contribute. And there's one goal, literally one goal, and when the puck goes in the net, all 5 sticks go up. It's everybody's accomplishment. So that has had a big influence on how I think about managing. Everybody's part of a team in some way, right? Everybody. And so I spend a lot of time with my own team, being a good team member on the teams that I'm on, and asking about people about how is your team going. Because if the team is functional and engaged and really working well, that's going to be very powerful. So for me, that's a big part of my style.
Yeah, that's a good example. I'm going to open this to questions from the audience in a minute. So hopefully we have lots of questions coming up. There's going to be a mic, I think, that will be touring the room. I'll have one last want to go at you before I'll open it. Just wondering how you're thinking about tough decisions and how to make them. We've seen more US companies recently announce job cuts. The economic sentiment is not getting any better. Just wondering how you're thinking about making those decisions. Don't want to indicate that any of you will make them, but just in case, just wondering how you're thinking about making those.
I'm happy to start. So we're not in a position where we're firing people. We're probably adding at this point because we're in rapid growth mode. But there are obviously difficult decisions we've had to make along the way. And you've said it earlier, you have to go back to your purpose. What is the things you're focused on as an organization? So for us, it's the patient. At the end of the day, everything we do, there's a patient at the end of that. So when we make those decisions, we take that perspective. So Russia was a good example. What do? Do you shut down your operations in the country? Maybe you do, but you have patients in those countries that rely on your cancer medication or your diabetes medication. I mean, these are life and death type of decisions. You can't not provide them with such important medicine. So how do you do it, right? How do you do it in a way that's appropriate and that keeps the patient in the center of everything you do? We did the same thing at the start of COVID. If you recall 2020, the one issue we had, masks was one of them, but we didn't have tests. You remember, we couldn't test everyone that had symptoms. So we created a testing facility on site in Indianapolis, which was used to run about 40–50% of the state's tests were run through us. And obviously, we have many scientists, PhDs, MDs, nurses who work for us. They all volunteer. They were at the site. They were testing people. Now, you might say, well, how is that a tough decision? You had to do it. We're not a medical device business. This is not what we do. We set it up in the parking lot at the front of the building, but it was an easy decision to do. It may look difficult from the outside, but for us, we knew here are the priorities we have: patient supply, employee safety and well-being. Those were key priorities. So when you have those and you don't change them because something happened, then your decisions are clear. It makes a tough decision much easier.
I would say the same, which is you start with your purpose first. I think we all in our careers will make tough decisions, whether we like it or not. But start with your purpose. Make sure you've set the right context for why you're making that decision. Make sure you're communicating it clearly, because at the end of the day, your employee base are adults too, so treat them like adults. At the same time, have empathy when you make some of the tough decisions, if it's a restructuring. But similarly, you had through the pandemic, where I'll use Annette's example, we had to ramp up our N95 production, which was, we are up to 3 billion N95s. But that meant you had to stop doing something else to make sure that was done, because it would help the world out in the pandemic. We had to make sure our employees came into the factories to make the production, while most of the salaried workers were sitting at home. And we had to make sure our employees were kept safe. We had to request engineers, because we had to ramp production up by 4x from what we used to make pre-pandemic. We had to convince those engineers that they had to go into the plant to help ramp up these facilities. But again, I think a lot of the organizations where you may from the outside looking and think these are hard decisions, there's this passion in the company that people will readily say, I'll go do it. But you have to make sure that there's a context set. You have to make sure they are kept safe. You have to make sure that you're communicating clearly. And let's not forget the empathy side of this whole thing, because you have to be able to look at it from their view too, versus just saying, I need it because I need to do it for the company. And as long as you explain it to the rational person, most people will take the hill for the company because they're proud to work for the company.
Do we have questions from the audience? Somebody there? Yes. Could you introduce yourself? And then also let us know who you want to answer.
This is a question from the gentleman from 3M. Yes, so you're pointing. Yes. Lester Premium from Springfield College in Springfield, Mass. My question is, you mentioned a program called Work Your Way. Did you have any new policies and procedures to do anything different as it relates to measuring productivity?
Yeah, so that's, I think, going to be the biggest test. So Work Your Way, just for everyone's benefit, is you're allowed to pick the location you want to work. You're allowed to pick when you want to come into work. You have to go into our HR system and declare how often you want to come into work. And that's it, as long as your supervisor agrees. So the test has always been, in an innovative company like ours, which is a heavy material science company, a lot of things happen by people hanging out together. And there was a fear that says, if we don't have everybody coming in together, R&D will come to a standstill. What we found through the pandemic, by allowing that flexibility where we allowed certain people coming into the lab as well as using digital technology, we were able to increase the number of NPIs that we put out on new products during the pandemic. And so our view is it works. But what we are consciously doing, as I mentioned before, is saying people need to come together in the moments that matter. So for us in finance, I haven't changed any productivity measures, because I know that people worked as hard or maybe even harder during the pandemic than they will work now. So my view is they've all been very productive. It's an odd view there's a lot of debate around, well, people are not productive because they're not in the office. We have proven the last 2 years it's not true. The test for us will continue to make sure that in the moments that matter, can we bring the people in with that collaboration to make sure our material science capabilities don't slow down. Through the pandemic, it didn't, but that's something we'll just have to watch. But so to answer your question in short, we haven't changed any measures because we generally believe it's trust-based. We believe our employees are actually doing a great job, whether they're in the office or not, so it's trust-based.
Any other questions? Yeah, there's one there.
I've got a
Hi.
loud voice. I just had a question, really for the panel, but how do CFOs become transformation officers? So I lead financial operations at a growth stage software company, and I work. Oh, thank you. And I work for our CFO, and we've got a lot of growth ahead, but we're trying to create the transition of just funding what the team wants and needs to trying to lead the transition or transformation as well. So would love any thoughts on that.
We've had a transformation program for a number of years now, and we intentionally put one of our most senior business leaders as the Chief Transformation Officer. Now, having said that, it was highly supported and guided by our finance team, as you would expect. But we had a business leader take the role to really take a business aspect to it. It wasn't just a cost cutting. It was actually looking to gain efficiencies in order to reinvest, to strengthen capabilities, and so we had a senior business leader do that. Having said that, we had a transformation finance team right there with that leader every step of the way, and it was their job to evaluate or build the business cases, to evaluate the business cases, to validate them financially, and then in order for the prioritization process to occur. So that's been our experience.
I don't actually see it. Oh, there, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Vip and Ricky. A quick question around one of the challenges that I'm having as a CFO is around talent development and more specifically talent acquisition. I don't work for a big name company. I work for a company called National Pen. It's under the Cimpress umbrella. But not a lot of people know about that. When I used to work for companies like GE Healthcare, for instance, everybody knows about that. So it's easier to attract talent. One of the things that I had to shift towards is really trying to cultivate and develop leaders within the organization so I can improve that bench strength. So my question really is, how do you go about really developing leadership internally within your organization?
So I can go, Nathan. Listen, I know a lot of people think only if you have a marquee name, you'll get the best talent. But at the end of the day, people are coming to work because they believe in the purpose and they believe what you stand for and what you can bring. So I think number one, if I was you, I would just make sure, I'm sure you're doing it, but just keep making sure you have a network that amplifies what you stand for, what you're going to do. If your specific question is internally, how do I build the leader? From our end, what we try to make sure is, one, I'm spending as much time through Gemba getting to know people. Two is we have a pretty formal process to identify high potentials. But three is we are taking those high potentials and formalizing a program in a way that we make sure they get their skill sets that they believe are needed for them to succeed. So it's not a mandated skill set as much as there's a coach who asks you, what are you looking for in your career? And then I try to make sure, too, that I'm watching the promotion of those and giving them the opportunities they want. Because otherwise, in this environment, it's very easy to lose talent. There's a war for talent in general as you go out there. And making sure that they want to come and work in the company because they want to, not because they need to, is very, very important. So we try to make sure we are marrying their skill sets, their desires, what they want in their career, and then making a very intentional approach to promotions so that they're getting those experiences that they need. And then, of course, compensation matters.
I'm just going to add just one more thing. I think talent acquisition is important. Talent retention is probably more important. So you get them through the door, how do you get them to stay and stay engaged? That's something that for a small company, I think you may want to think ahead of what's your retention strategy. Do you want people to stay with the company for 20 years? Do you want them to stay 5, 10 years? Do you want them to come in for a job, or do you want them to come in for a career? And you probably want to outline that for them as well. Here is our strategy. Because if your strategy is to bring someone for a job, they do the job 2 to 3 years and they move on, that's one acquisition strategy and retention strategy. If you want them to come in for a career and then grow with the company, you want to paint that picture for them. We talked about how do you create a vision for the organization. Paint that picture for them, because people need that. You may not be able to provide precision, right, on you're going to do this in year 4, this in year 3. But an overall, right, if we're successful, here is how I see the future evolving, and you have the opportunity to be part of leading that vision and future.
I'll just echo some of those thoughts. Purpose, it starts there, but people really want development, and they want opportunities, and they want a variety of experiences. At larger companies, you can do that systematically by moving people around and getting them a variety of experiences, but at a smaller company, you need to feature what you can offer them. They could probably get more hands-on experience and more decision-making power than they could at a bigger company. So I would look for those aspects of, what is it about how they're going to develop, and how are they going to gain experiences that they couldn't get other places, as a way to, retain them and develop them, because that's ultimately what people want.
I think we're out of time, unless there's a quick last one. I think then we're good. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name's Paul Ryan. I'm part of the organizing committee, along with my colleague Katarina, who's bringing gifts to the panelists. I want to once again thank the panelists for a fantastic job. Nina, Monish, Anat, and Ken. Very well done. How about another round of applause, please, for the panelists? Okay. We have, it's 1:15 now. I think we have a short break. Track 1, which is the innovation panel, will be here at 1:30 in the Grand Ballroom, and then track 2, effective traits of the CFO, will be in the ballroom right behind us next door. So enjoy the rest of the program.